it's Kat and I'm back today for my 1 month, 1 palette video. This is for May. So for May, I used the Lorac Pro 2 palette mainly exclusively all month. Now with this series, if you're not familiar, what I am doing is I'm picking an old palette that I've had in my collection for a while and I'm using it all month, and I need to use the palette at least 3 or 4 times a week. It doesn't have to be the only palette I use, and I can incorporate other shades from other palettes or other single eyeshadows to go along with it. I want to give it a good shot and really see how I feel about the palette after I've used it for a whole month, after I've used every single shade, and then I report back to you guys how I went, what I think of the palette overall, what shades I liked, what I didn't like, why, and then also showing you looks that I've sort of created throughout the month, along with doing a demonstration at the end of like a look that I particularly liked. Now the look that I created is this one here, so it's sort of like a grey, silver, black, brown sort of smoky eye sort of thing going on, and it's one of the last looks that I actually created in this month, but I did put it on Instagram and I did wear it in a beauty news episode and a review that I did, and a few people are like, I want to see how you did that, and it's very, very simple, so that will be right at the end. Okay, I'm going to start with just talking about the Lorac Pro 2 palette. So this is the second one in the series. The first one is a lot warmer, and I mainly picked this one because it is quite cold in Melbourne at the moment. We're getting into winter. Winter is, well, when you're watching this, it is currently winter, but right now it's a day away from winter, so it's getting pretty cold and miserable. It's sort of like scarf weather, jackets, boots, and I'm sort of really digging these sort of smokier looks and also the cooler toned looks. So in this time of year, I often will go for more of a taupe rather than a gold, and I like sort of like purple toned colors to blend things out rather than oranges. So I sort of looked at this palette and thought, okay, I've got a lot of safe options here. So if I am like, if these I don't really wear often, I can still create some really nice looks using these sort of more safer, neutral, basic sort of nude shades. But then I've got a pop of blue, purple, grey, black, a dark green and a dark brown and a silver in case I wanted to like vamp it up and try something a bit different. So that's what that's why I chose this palette. But I have to say, over this period, I've been really enjoying this. I was quite surprised at how much I've enjoyed it. I was quite surprised how much I was reaching for it. I was pretty much, even when I'd used all the shades and created looks using all the shades, I was still going back to this because I really did enjoy it. I made huge dents in it. So pretty much there's a massive dent in buff. It's like there's a dent in it. That's going to hit pan soon. I've also made a big dent in cool grey, light brown. So this is a very soft palette and I used it a lot. So look, I'm going to say, okay, overall my impressions of this was I had a good time using it. I think for the time of year and the looks that I wanted to create, I thought this was a perfect palette. It blends really nicely, it applies really nicely. The formula is very, 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 very similar to the Modern Renaissance, which I did the video on, I think last month was it, when I did Modern Renaissance, I think. But that it's very, very similar. So it is quite pigmented, very soft. You do pick up a lot on the brush because it is so soft and it's like softly pressed in the pan, but it does blend really nice, and when you put a color on, generally you'll see the color pretty well. So the formula, if you have never tried Lorac Pro palettes, which were around way before Anastasia palettes, they're very similar to Anastasia quality. So that's that. I enjoyed it overall. Now, just before I get on to specific shades and what I thought about them and the looks I created, I did want to say that I found that the mattes in this palette were a lot better than the shimmers. Now, there were some shimmers that I went for often. Pretty much the shimmers I used frequently were Rosé and Mocha. Rosé was definitely the most shimmery one. And Mocha was just a nice overall sort of brown. I think followed by Chrome. I used Chrome a little bit as well if I wanted a cooler toned look, but those were definitely the 3 shimmer shades I used the most, whereas pretty much all the matte shades were consistently good. They were very pigmented, they were nice to blend, they were soft, they were great, maybe with the exception of Nectar. Now I did use that a lot and I will talk about that in a second, but that didn't it didn't translate as well in the eye. I kind of thought that when you put it on, it was going to be as bold as something like light brown or cool gray. It sort of was very, very muted. So it was nice to blend and to like transition a shade, but as its own shade, it was a bit lackluster with pigmentation. But let's go through the looks. Okay, so I used Buff a lot. I mainly used it all over just to set my eyeshadow primer to help the colors blend. So I did use that pretty much in every single look, but I didn't actually create any looks using it on its own. So that was just a shade that I think is a staple in these kind of palettes, just to set your base, just to a wash of sort of barely any color, but it just helps blend the other shades. So I use that a lot. I do want to say Snow down here, I really didn't like that shade. I used it only as an inner corner highlight. It is pretty much a white shade, and these are too frosty for my eyes. They just don't suit me. And you can see that on its own, it does look all right. But the problem I had with these shimmers overall was on their own, they are quite nice. Like if you swatch them, you kind of go, oh yeah, they're, you know, they apply quite nicely, but you can see that they don't have much of a reflection to them. So besides maybe Rosé, which was that sort of rosy champagne color, that one was the most shimmery of the bunch. So those are those sort of 5 nude shimmer shades, and they're very, very soft to apply. They blend really nicely, but I don't know if you can see that they sort of look more satin than they do shimmers. I'm so used to these days having really metallic foil looking shimmers where you put them on and they really like pack a punch. They also, if you layer them on top of a dark shade, they sort of take over the dark shade, but these didn't do that. The only shade that actually had much of a sheen to it was that rosé shade, and the rest of them were just like soft satin shades. So these were nice on their own. So if you wanted, so for example, I used beige on its own. I'll put a photo on the screen where I just used that all over the lid, I think with one of the, I think it was light brown or something, just in the crease, and that was a nice look, but it's not particularly shimmery, it's not particularly you know, full on or intense. It's just a very soft just wash of color on the lid, and you know, that's got a time and place. But it was also limiting a little bit. So going back to why I didn't like Snow, didn't have much of an intensity when it comes to shimmer. So when I did actually try to use this as an inner corner highlight, there will be a photo on the screen. It looked like I was using a white translucent powder on the inner corner. It barely did anything. Because these don't have the reflective qualities of like a foiled eyeshadow or a really intense shimmer, these don't layer well on top of other colors. So when I had done brown or whatever the color it was all over my lid, or taupe or whatever it was, and then I go in with that Snow color to put a pop of highlight, unless you apply it wet, it pretty much showed up as like a powdery white. So I found that that was a problem with all the shimmers except for Rosé, which actually did show up as an inner corner highlight. All of these didn't layer well on darker colors. So these colors did show up well when they were on their own, but when you did layer them or mix them with other colors, they sort of disappeared. So yeah, I didn't like these two. I may as well just finish by talking about these 3 sort of nude shimmery shades as well before I get back onto the top row. So these 3, so Rosé, Mocha and Chrome, were my most used shimmers. Definitely Rosé was probably the best performing because it did have a bit of a sheen to it, so you could use it as an inner corner highlight, you could use it all over the lid. It was a very, very flattering color, and it worked really well with the other shades as well. So for example, I've got it here where I wore it all over the lid. I put the navy color just in the crease and I used a teal liner, and I thought that looked really pretty. I often just used it all over the lid as like a nude look, just a quick wash of color, and I'd put a matte in the crease. This look is a typical example of that. I really like the effect of it. You can see that it did have a bit of a sheen to it, so it was a shimmer. You could see the like reflection, but I just put the caramel shade in the crease, so that light brown shade, and it looked great. I really like this look, and it was sort of one of those staple looks that I went back to often. I've also got that same shade here with the jade color, so the dark green color. You can see that it holds up on its own. It's got some shimmer, but it works well with a lot of shades in this palette. On the inner corner there, I did have a liquid liner, like a metallic liquid liner, because there weren't very intense highlighters in this particular palette for me to reach for. So if I did want something really like intense or sparkly, I'd have to go for something like either a pigment or a Stila Magnificent Metal Glitter and Glow type product, because the shimmers in here just didn't do it. I also did that same sort of nude look with the taupe in the crease, just to make it a little bit more cool toned. But you can see, like, you could pair this with pretty much anything in this palette. That champagne sort of rosé color goes with any of these mattes, goes with the purples, the blues, the greens. It works really well. So that was probably my favorite performing shimmer shade. Mocha was probably also one of those ones that I reached for a lot. One of the first looks I used creating this, I put mocha all over the lid, and I used it with that navy shade. And you can see in that look that I created quite a smoky look. I think I put some purples in there as well. And I found that the blue definitely did sort of overtake that bronze, which is definitely a problem that happens because these shimmery shades just don't like hold their own if you mix it with really dominating colors. So yeah, that one was a bit intense, but I didn't mind the combination. I also loved the bronze on its own. It was a color that I often reach for if I was just going to work. You can see it here with just a bit of mascara, and I think I had just the bronze color. There was no crease color. It was really good because since they are more of a shimmery satin sort of shade, you can pack it on and have a little bit more light reflection, but then blend it into the crease and it diffuses to more of a matte sort of color. So this looks like I've got something in the crease, but I don't. I've just got the bronze color. Mocha. It's called Mocha. Then I've also paired the Mocha with the purple. So you can see here, similar kind of thing, just a little bit more vampy because I've got the purple in there. It was just a really easy color to use, but I think it worked best once again on its own with something that wasn't super competing with it for color. So maybe a light brown or the Nectar to go with it just to blend it out. It was a really beautiful shade. Then the color Chrome, which is like the taupey shimmery shade. I use that in a similar way as well when I just wanted something a little bit more cool toned. You can see on the hand that it's sort of a similar tone. It's a similar sort of mid-toned color, but one is warmer, one is cooler. So it just depends on, they perform the same way, just depends on which one you prefer. And again, you know, I wore this with the purple shade to make it a little bit more of an intense look. You can see I've got liner here, but then again, I think these really shine when you're not competing with liners and a lot of color. So this is where I just paired it with the light brown shade, and I think it created a nice, more like a cooler toned, more smoky version of just quite a natural look. Easy to apply, easy to blend, but once again, I think these work best when they're not competing with other shades. You can see here that I tried to apply it with the shade Charcoal, which is that matte gray, and I found it, once again, it went from sort of everyday wearable look to quite dark, bold look very, very quickly because the mattes, if they're darker, they do overtake the look very, very quickly. Let's continue with the shimmers. So the silver, I'm wearing it today. So silver I put all over the lid, and I'll recreate my look at the very end, but I did, there's a photo with lashes and whatnot. But silver is a nice shade on its own again. It is quite pigmented, but it's not super, super metallic. So I'll build it up a little bit in this swatch for you. So you can see the color there, and even though it does have a bit of sheen, I think it still lacks a lot of reflectiveness and foiled sort of effect compared to many other shimmers that I've used. But I did find that with this shade, you need to make it a feature, otherwise it sort of disappears. I did try to actually use this on top of a darker color, and it just turned like grey lead pencil grey. It didn't have that reflective metallic quality that you expect from a silver. It sort of just went, I don't know, like a muted grey. So I find that you can create some nice looks with it. So I like the look that I've done today, but it needs to be quite, I don't know, the center of attention. If you try to add this on top of other things just to tap it on and give a sheen, it won't give a sheen. It'll just mute it in a really weird grey way. So these shimmers all sort of have the same problem where on their own they look quite good and they apply it nice and smoothly and they, you know, look quite nice, but they just don't have much reflect to either add as a highlighter, as a pop of color, or anything like that. They just sort of diffuse and disappear. And when you put it with competing colors, and you'll see at the end as well when I do this look, as soon as I put the gray on, it started overtaking the silver because the silver just sort of doesn't hold its own. Interestingly though, the last two shimmers here, I actually didn't like these. And I remember when I first got this palette, I was really keen for the green shade, which is Jade, because I love those sort of goldy green, sort of, you know, those shimmery green shades as like a smoky look on brown eyes. And I do like a dark sort of shimmery brown as well. But these, they're very, very dark. Now, so you've gone from these sort of wishy-washy, nice to blend and apply, but not very intense shimmers, to a dark brown that is almost black, and a dark green that once again is almost black. Now these are almost too pigmented. They don't have much shimmer in them, so once again they apply more like a satin on the eyes, and they do blend quite nicely, but they overtake a look instantly. Now I did show a look using the green with the champagne, and you know, so you can use it sparingly to deepen a look, and you know, it was okay. But I feel like that this green looks a lot like a muted black or a grey rather than a bright green or a green at all. So I didn't love this shade. I used it once, and you can see me applying it when I just had the green on. It was like, oh, this looks like not good. It does not look good. And then to save it, I tried to put some of these other shimmers over the top, and it just wouldn't lift the color. So for me to actually put a shimmery shade over the top, which you can see now, I had to use a pigment. So this is not a shimmery shade from the palette because the shimmery shades just don't show up on this dark green to lift the look. And that's the problem with these shimmers. They don't layer well. They don't have much reflect to lift a dark color, and there's a lot of dark colors in this palette that you kind of wish you had a really metallic gold or champagne color where you can just tap it on and it just brightens a look. These didn't do it. So I didn't love these because they were too dark and they just didn't work well with the other shades. They were instantly like punch in the face black sort of look. I did use the brown as a dominant shade in one look that I created, and I tried to do a dark kind of smoky eye using this, so I sort of was expecting it to be dark, but I used the bronze shade, the mocha shade, on the inner half, and then I used the cocoa on the outer half and lower lash line. You can see how dark this went, and once again I had to use a different product to highlight because none of these shimmery shades worked as a highlighter on top of such a dark color. So I didn't hate this look. I think it was a nice look, but it's pretty much one of the only looks you can use using that brown, because that brown is so dark and dominating. Okay, on to the rest of the mattes. I mainly used a lot of these mattes just as like transition colors to build on or you know, create a full look using these shimmers. But I do have to say these are very, very nicely pigmented. You can see here, like even on my dirty fingers, that sort of light brown shows up really well. So you can see it. They're so pigmented and beautiful. So the taupe is very dark. For what you think it might be, it's very, very dark. But if you swatch all of these, they all have a similar sort of thing where they are very, very nicely pigmented. So that's the purple, beautiful. That's the navy, which was a color I loved. I love this shade. We'll talk about it. But and then we've got the charcoal, which is super soft, and the black as well. So these are like intense shades. They're really, really beautiful. They're really easy to work with, but I'm going to just wipe off my fingers for a second on the towel that's on my lap. And when you go in with Nectar, I just found that it wasn't as good. So when you are playing with these sort of colors and you are expecting that the kind of Nectar shade to hold its own when it comes to you know, looking peachy on the eye, I just found that it was really lost amongst the other shades that performed really, really well. But all of those mattes were glorious. Look at them. There's no primer on that arm. That blue. Oh my God. So this is where I'm saying the shimmers I didn't love. They were functional and I loved some of the shades because they were just easy to apply, but the mattes were where this palette was at. Let's get Buff in there as well, just to show you if I can put it on here. So it definitely, you can see it, it holds its own. It's quite nicely pigmented. So pretty much the first three shades, Buff, Light Brown, and Cool Grey, I just use them as like transitions. Same as Nectar, but I'll show you some photos of Nectar on the screen. I just found that it might add a little bit of color to the look, but it really didn't add much depth or dimension or anything. It was just, you really had to layer it to show the Nectar shade. I do have to say though that I did try once to mix Nectar and Plum to do an all over matte look, and that did create quite a nice sort of color. So I think Nectar I used more to tone down some of the darker shades rather than using it just on its own. I found the purple to be really nice. It just worked really well with some of the cooler shades or to add a bit of dimension. It wasn't too purple, it wasn't too, I don't know, it worked really well with the other kind of nude shades. When it comes to navy, I freaking loved navy. I used it with another blue eyeshadow just to deepen it, and it worked so well. It worked really well with the bronze, it worked really well with the rosé. Whenever I paired it with other things, it was just a beautiful shade. It did like definitely pack a punch. It was obviously quite blue, but I think it was nice and usable and I really, really enjoyed it. When it comes to the grey, I don't use grey too much. I used it a couple of times. It made it look very muddy. It's just not my kind of thing. But I also found that this did make a look a little bit more blue tone. So like on my eyes today, I find that this has almost like a blue tinge to it, but I find it's just the charcoal that when it blends out, it looks a little bit more cooler toned than neutral. And the black was quite nice as well. So the black, not the blackest shade in the world, but I do use this at the end. You can see that you apply it, it can build up quite nicely. It's not a problem. There's not too much fallout, even though these are very, very soft. So yeah, overall, I think some shades I really liked here and some shades I didn't love. The shimmers were a bit lacking, but these three shades were nice to use on their own, just, you know, a wash of color on the lid. And overall the mattes were really, really great. So I really enjoyed my month using this palette. It's kind of a bit of a shame to say goodbye, but I think the palette would be a lot better if that sort of, if the shimmers were more reflective and more shimmery rather than satin. And also if the dark brown and the dark green were a bit lighter, so you could actually incorporate them into more looks without them being too dominating. So that was my main takeaway from this palette, but otherwise I really enjoyed it. All right guys, before I show you how I got this look, I'm going to announce what my next month palette is going to be. Now I did do a poll on Instagram and on YouTube, and I think it was sort of like all over the place, and I think overall it was leaning one way, but I'm gonna go the other way, I'm very sorry. So the two options that I was talking about was, this is the old school Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette. This is all shimmer, and that's sort of one reason where I'm a bit like, ugh. Oh, it means I have to every day pretty much reach for another palette or a couple of eyeshadows. And I was looking at this because it's got some nice neutrals, it's got some nice colors, and it's not too many shades. Now what I want to do next month, or this month, is I want to have a palette that's sort of not really hard to incorporate, because I want to try some other palettes that I've got or other products that I've got. I find that when I have a palette that I'm really dedicated into creating many, many looks using, it means that I can't pretty much review other eye products. So this month I do want to play with other stuff. I've got, for example, the Urban Decay Back Talk palette here that I do want to use a bit more of. But like last month, I think I reached for other eyeshadows maybe 3 times out of the month. So I wanted a sort of easier palette that I don't need to put too much effort into creating multiple looks. So I was looking at this one because it's an 8 pan, and then I also pulled out the Eyes of the Window Soul palette from Stila. Now I love this palette. So this is a 12 pan palette, so it's a bit bigger, and it means that there is a bit more work, but this is more of a standard palette where you do have mattes, you do have a few shimmers, you have some cools, you have some warms. So yeah, this month I sort of wanted to go a bit basic because I want to try out other things alongside doing this series. Whereas I found in all May, I was really struggling incorporating other palettes and trying to review other products because I was so dedicated to the Lorac Pro. So yeah, I was looking at these two, a really basic one and a small one. I think people wanted to see me do this one, but I'm really sorry guys, I've decided I want to do this. Looking at it, I'm actually really excited because I love the balance of colors. This was an old favorite of mine. And for this one, I'm just like, oh God, I'm gonna have to incorporate another palette with it, which is really annoying. And if I was to do that, I sort of wanted to do it with a brighter, more interesting palette rather than just this. So what I might do to compromise is sometimes do some looks using some of these fun colors like that bottom color there, or even that green in a look using these. So that's how I'm sort of compromising it, I'm sorry. But I am gonna be using the Stila Eyes of the Window Soul palette, which is also good because this palette's still available, whereas that Comfort Zone one has been reformulated and totally changed. So it's probably more relevant. But after this month, I am thinking of doing something a little bit more colorful and a little bit more interesting. So bear with me. All right, guys, that was my recap of my 1 month, 1 palette using the Lorac Pro 2. If you want to stick around and see how I did this eye look, it's coming up now. Bye. All right, so now time for the look and how I did it. It's pretty simple. Let's get on to it. But I'll show you first the shades that I used for it. So what I'm going to be using is this to set my base. I'll eventually use this to blend out the look. Then I use the silver all over the lid, this on the outer corner, and that even to deep it up further. Now, the funny thing about this look was I only did it to actually use this shade and these shades a bit more because I hadn't actually done a look using the silver. So it was sort of just like a last ditch attempt to create a look using the silver. So yeah, that's what it was. All right, so I do have some primer on. I'm just going in with that buff shade with a really fluffy brush just to set that a little bit. I don't want to set the lid too much because I want the silver to stick, but I do want to set sort of like the crease so the mattes blend nicely. So that's just what I'm doing there. Then with a flatter brush, I'm going in with that silver shade and I'm just packing it on. Now this shade, I hope I talk about it in the video, does apply nicely just on a primer on its own, but it shows up really badly on top of darker shades. So I sort of wanted to originally, my plan was to use this shade over like the black or the dark blue, but I learnt pretty quickly that even though these are quite intense shimmers on their own, they really don't hold up very well on top of a darker shade. They just sort of disappear. And I did try to put this on top of a darker shade once, just on the inner corner, and it just looked grey. It sort of looked really, really like a light, boring grey. So it does look shimmery on its own, but yeah, it's not the best over other things. So I'm just putting that all over the lid. I'm also going to run that on the lower lash line. This brush is pretty big, but you know, I kind of like that messy look, so it doesn't bother me not being super precise. Alright, so pretty much what I did with the grey, which is the charcoal shade, is I just tapped it on the outer maybe third. And you can see it's quite nicely pigmented. It blends, it applies pretty nicely, like there's no problem with it. I do find that this shade ends up looking a little bit blue, but whatever. And then what I do with just the leftovers is I sort of transition it a little bit, just blend it into the silver, and eventually what it'll sort of look like, you know, do it however you want, but I sort of prefer more grey than silver because I find the silver a little bit too harsh. So I've sort of got, look, it's not blended yet, but I've sort of got the grey here. It sort of blends in that inner part and then goes silver. Now, because the mattes are more pigmented than the silver, you can see that even though I tried to just blend it, it sort of takes over the silver. So I've just got a little bit more silver to transition that a little bit better. Same here, just want a little bit more silver to make it a little bit lighter. And then running a tiny bit of that charcoal, this is all the same brush by the way, just on the lower lash line to sort of mimic what I did on the top. I don't like it to be too neat. I just kind of chuck it on. Then with that original fluffy brush that I used to put that sort of buff shade all over, I'm going in with light brown, which is that sort of caramel shade. And I think this is the key. So I'm using that to blend it out. But I find that a warm shade really helps make this look a lot more wearable. Like if I put grey up into the crease, I would find that it is way too harsh, whereas that brown just makes it a little bit more wearable. Just running that a little bit on the lower lash line as well. Some on the other side. So all of a sudden it's just sort of grounded the look and made it a little bit more, not natural, because it's definitely not a natural look, but a little bit more warmer. We can see that there's a surprising amount of brown on there that you don't really notice, because you sort of notice the grey and the silver, but you don't really notice the brown, but that's what sort of makes it look a lot more wearable in my opinion. All right, so that's a liner done. I just quickly put, you know, liner on as you do. I really like putting a darker color on my waterline because I find that it sort of elongates the eye a little bit and just works a lot better with these sort of dark looks. I was actually going to leave it here when I originally was planning on doing the look, but I thought this was a good excuse to like play with the black as well. Like, why not use the 3 shades that I wasn't using much rather than just 2? So I decided to go in with black and deepen the outer part and just blend the liner a little bit more. And that worked out really well, and I'll show you the difference. So I'll do it on one eye. I've just got a really small sort of fluffy brush. It's a kind of small one where I'm just going to dot it on the outer corner and just on the very outer corner. So black, the problem with black is that it can overtake a look very, very quickly. So it's best to just keep it contained and spread it slowly, which is what I sort of did. I think I also took it a little bit in the crease, just a little bit. And just on a flatter brush, just on the lower lash line. And if I sound funny when I'm explaining this, it's because I'm doing these ones as I'm doing it. So, you know, that's a thing. Going back with that big fluffy brush with a tiny, tiny bit of that brown just to blend this out a little bit. You could do it with a grey if you wanted to. I prefer the brown. So even though I didn't put too much black, I might have put a little bit more black when I did the photo, but you can see straight away that that has changed the eye shape, added a lot more dimension than that one. So I sort of prefer this. I think that little bit of black really does make it look a little bit more dramatic and interesting. So black, you know, it's a good color to have, but I don't use it often. All right, so that's the eyeshadow done and dusted. Not super complicated. You know, it might take a little bit of patience to put the black on so you're not getting it like falling down your face and you're not putting too much on, but you know, I think it does have a really nice effect. I'm just going to go curl my lashes and put some mascara on. This is the Urban Decay Perversion mascara. I did in that look wear lashes, but I can't bother putting lashes on right now, so we're just going with curled lashes and mascara. And that's the final look with mascara on. So you can see that it is quite a dramatic look. You know, I'm going out for a coffee after this, but I wouldn't normally wear this to a coffee, but I think this really does complement brown eyes. The problem is that wearing greys and blacks and silvers can often look really, really dated and really like frosty, but I find that if you put some brown with it, it really anchors the look and it turns it to be a lot more flattering. If I went for more like the taupe to blend this out, I don't think it would be anywhere near as wearable as it actually is here, but it's a very, very simple look. I find that this is probably best if you are not super, super precise, not too much of a cut crease, just a bit blendy, a bit smoky, a bit grungy. I think it sort of works well, and it works well with a kind of bold lip in like the cooler months. It's sort of like a fun kind of look. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.